There is a reason some people can ruin your whole day without touching your life in any meaningful way. They do not need access to your money. They do not need access to your home. They do not even need access to your future. All they need is access to your attention. And once they get that, even for a few minutes, they can live inside your mind far longer than they deserve. That is the trap. Not the insult itself, not the disrespect, not the passive-aggressive comment, not the cold message, not the fact that someone ignored you, dismissed you, mocked you, or tried to get under your skin. The trap is what happens after. The trap is that you carry it, you replay it, you feed it, you build a private room for it in your head, and then you sit there with it for hours, like it belongs in your life. And the strangest part is that most people do this so often, they no longer see it as a loss of power. They call it caring, they call it being emotional, they call it being human. But a lot of what people call sensitivity is really just unguarded attention, a mind with no gate, a life with no filter, a nervous system that treats every outside disturbance like a personal emergency. So let me ask you something that may sound harsh, but it matters. How much of your life has already been stolen by people who were never important enough to deserve it? How many mornings have been weakened by one message? How many nights have been poisoned by one conversation? How many hours have been burned trying to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you? How many times have you abandoned your own peace just to keep fighting a battle that should have ended the moment you walked away from it? This is where most people get the whole thing wrong. They think strength means answering. They think maturity means explaining. They think confidence means always having the perfect comeback, the final word, the airtight defense that proves once and for all that they were right and the other person was wrong. But that is not power. That is dependence wearing the mask of power. Real power begins the moment you realize that not everything deserves a response. Not every disrespect deserves your emotions. Not every opinion deserves your analysis. Not every provocation deserves a place in your bloodstream. Some things become big only because you keep returning to them. Some people feel powerful only because you keep volunteering your attention. Some conflicts stay alive only because you keep breathing life into them. The Stoics understood something that most people spend years learning the hard way. If you do not guard your inner world, the outer world will occupy it for free. And once that happens, you may still look functional on the outside, but inwardly you are no longer living by choice. You are living by reaction. You are waking up, checking your mood, and discovering that somebody else set the temperature. That is no way to live, because your attention is not a small thing. It is your life in its most usable form. Where your attention goes, your energy follows. Where your energy goes, your habits begin to form. And where your habits form, your future slowly takes shape. Which means every time you hand your attention to nonsense, drama, manipulation, petty disrespect, and people who feed on reactions, you are not just losing a moment, you are misinvesting your life. And once you see that clearly, a lot of your old behavior starts to look different. That urge to defend yourself to someone who has already decided what to think about you, that was never dignity. That was emotional leakage. That need to respond immediately because silence feels weak. That was never strength. That was conditioning. That obsession with making sure people know your intentions, your heart, your truth, your side of the story. That was never peace. That was fear wearing a noble face. And this is uncomfortable because many good people fall into this trap precisely because they are sincere. They want to be fair. They want to be understood. They want to repair tension. They want to clear up confusion. They want to keep things clean between themselves and others. But the world is not made only of sincere people. Some people do not want clarity. They want access. Some people do not want truth. They want reaction. Some people do not want resolution. They want influence. And the easiest way for them to influence you is not to change your life directly. It is to enter your mind indirectly. That is why a weak person can still disturb a strong life if the mind inside that life remains unguarded. You can have goals, you can have discipline, you can have talent, you can have a clear direction, and still lose whole days to someone who does not deserve 5 minutes of your mind. That should bother you. Because every minute you spend mentally wrestling with someone small is a minute your real life is not being built. Your body is not being strengthened. Your money is not being earned. Your work is not being completed. Your craft is not being sharpened. Your future is not being protected. You may look still, but inwardly your energy is being pulled into places that produce nothing. And this is why ignoring people, in the deeper sense, is not childish, cold, or immature. It is selective respect for your own energy. It is the discipline of saying, I see what this is, and I refuse to let it live inside me. It is the decision to stop treating every outside disturbance like a moral obligation to respond. It is the practice of noticing the hook without biting it. It is the art of remaining inwardly untouched by things that were sent to disturb you. This does not mean you become numb. It does not mean you stop caring. It does not mean you become arrogant, detached, or emotionally dead. It means you finally understand that peace has a gate, and not everyone gets through it. Imagine what would change in your life if you truly learned that. Imagine hearing disrespect and not carrying it. Imagine receiving coldness and not collapsing into self-doubt. Imagine being misunderstood and still sleeping well. Imagine someone trying to bait you into drama and finding nothing to hold on to. Imagine how much cleaner your mind would feel if you stopped turning every irritation into an inner event. That kind of life is available to you, but not if you keep confusing reaction with strength. And that is where this episode begins. Not with tactics, not with manipulation, not with little tricks to make people chase you. It begins with a much harder question. Why have you been so available to things that do not deserve you? Why does one careless word still get inside so easily? Why does one person's behavior still have the power to alter your emotional climate? Why are you still giving strangers, co-workers, family members, old relationships and passing irritations the authority to interrupt your mind? Until you answer that honestly, you will keep calling it stress when it is really surrender. If this message is already hitting something real in you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me on this path. Not for empty motivation, not for noise, but to train a stronger mind. A mind that does not bend every time life applies pressure. A mind that knows how to hold its ground, protect its peace, and move with intention in a world that is constantly trying to pull it off center. Because the truth is, most people never lose their peace in one dramatic moment. They lose it in fragments. A reply here, a glance there, a little disrespect, a little gossip, a little comparison, a little emotional bait, a little urge to explain, a little obsession with being understood, and piece by piece, their attention is gone. Their body is in one place, but their mind is owned by 10 different people. That is the quiet tragedy. Not that the world is noisy. The world has always been noisy. The tragedy is that you have not yet decided what deserves to enter you and what deserves to remain outside. And once you begin to make that distinction, your whole life starts to feel different, because you stop living as an open wound. You stop walking through the world available to every provocation. You stop acting like every little thing has the right to become part of your inner life. You begin to feel something that many people almost never feel. Space. Space between what happens and how you respond. Space between the trigger and the choice. Space between someone else's behavior and your identity. Space between the noise outside and the order you are trying to build within. And in that space, your strength starts to return. Not loud strength, not theatrical strength, not the kind that needs witnesses. Real strength. The kind that lets you sit still while someone else tries to shake you. The kind that lets you keep your day when someone else loses theirs. The kind that refuses to hand over its peace just because another person arrived with chaos in their hands. But to build that kind of strength, you have to see something even more clearly. Most people who disturb you are not powerful. They are hungry. Hungry for reaction. Hungry for relevance. Hungry for proof that they can still reach into your system and move something. And the moment you understand that, the whole game changes. Because now the question is no longer, how do I respond to them? Now the question becomes, why would I feed this at all? The reason certain people can get under your skin so quickly is usually not because they are powerful. It is because they touch something unfinished in you. That is what makes this difficult. If it were only about rude people, arrogant people, manipulative people, or disrespectful people, the solution would be simple. You would identify them, avoid them, and move on. But life is rarely that clean. The real reason some voices linger in your mind is that they do not just arrive from the outside. They collide with something already waiting for them on the inside. An insecurity, an old wound, a need to be respected, a fear of being dismissed, a hunger to be understood, a quiet ache to be seen correctly, a part of you that still feels it must prove its worth every time it is questioned. And when someone touches that place, your reaction becomes bigger than the event itself. That is why one person can hear an insult and let it pass, while another replays it all day. That is why one cold message can become a small moment for one mind and a personal storm for another. The outside event may be the same, but the inner terrain is different. One mind has space around the wound. The other still lives inside it. This is why ignoring people is not just a social skill, it is an inner achievement. Because to truly ignore what does not deserve you, you have to become less easily hooked by what it touches in you. You have to understand your own patterns. You have to notice which kinds of people pull you fastest, which tones change your mood, which forms of disrespect you take too personally, which silences make you anxious, which misunderstandings awaken the old urge to over-explain. And most people never study themselves at that level. They study other people constantly. They study tone. They study text messages. They study facial expressions. They study social dynamics. They study whether someone is pulling away, acting strange, hiding something, judging them, disrespecting them, testing them. But they do not study the one thing that matters most, why they are so easily moved. That is the deeper work. Because the world will never run out of difficult people. It will never run out of careless words, ego games, emotional immaturity, subtle disrespect, passive aggression, half-truths, coldness, manipulation, and noise. If your peace depends on the world becoming softer, more mature, more considerate, and more fair, then your peace will always be delayed. It will always be conditional. It will always remain in someone else's hands. But if your peace begins to depend on self-knowledge, then you become much harder to disturb. You start catching the pattern earlier. You notice that some people do not actually have emotional access to you because they are important. They have access because they resemble something. Maybe they remind you of someone who used to withhold approval. Maybe they trigger the same feeling you had when you were overlooked, judged, or dismissed. Maybe they awaken the old belief that if you are misunderstood, then somehow you have failed. Maybe they activate the part of you that still equates respect with safety. And once you see that, something powerful happens. You stop treating every trigger like a present emergency. You begin to recognize it as old material. That changes everything. Because now, when someone provokes you, you do not just see their behavior. You also see the doorway in yourself they are knocking on. And instead of rushing to answer, you pause. You say to yourself, this is not just about them. This is also about what this touches in me. This discomfort is real, but it is not always truth. This urgency to respond is strong, but it is not always wisdom. This desire to defend myself feels noble, but it may just be an old wound demanding relief. That pause is where self-control becomes real. Not in theory, not in quotes, not in a calm sentence you post online. In the actual moment where your body wants to react, your ego wants to speak, your emotions want to chase, and yet something steadier inside you says, no, not this time. I see the hook. I see why it works, and I refuse to keep living like this. That is a powerful moment in a human life. Because many people go their whole lives thinking they are reacting to others, when in reality they are reacting to themselves through others. They think the problem is the comment, but the deeper problem is the bruise. They think the problem is being ignored, but the deeper problem is what being ignored seems to mean to them. They think the problem is disrespect. But the deeper problem is the fragile place inside that still believes another person's treatment defines their value. This is why the goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become less governable, less easy to control, less easy to provoke, less easy to drag into rehearsed emotional patterns, less easy to manipulate through approval, disapproval, silence, praise, blame, or confusion. You do not get there by hardening your face. You get there by understanding your mind. You begin asking better questions. Why does this type of person affect me so much? Why do I still need certain people to validate what I already know? Why does misunderstanding feel so threatening? Why do I feel compelled to fix every false impression? Why do I keep trying to win peace from places that only offer tension? That kind of honesty is uncomfortable, but it is freeing. Because once you locate the weak spot, you can begin protecting it without letting it rule you. You can heal it without building an identity around it. You can become compassionate with yourself without remaining available to everything that touches it. And then a strange thing begins to happen. People who once had easy access to your mind start losing their grip, not because they changed, not because they became kinder, not because life suddenly became orderly, but because there is less unfinished business inside you for them to manipulate. Their words still exist, but they land in a different place. Their tone still exists, but it echoes less. Their distance still exists, but it does not automatically become a judgment on your worth. Their provocation still exists, but now it meets a mind that has more room, more clarity, more structure, more self-respect. And that is what real growth often feels like. Not dramatic revenge, not one perfect speech, not making everyone regret underestimating you. It feels quieter than that. It feels like someone trying to pull you into an old pattern and finding that the door no longer opens the same way. It feels like hearing something that once would have ruined your whole day and realizing it only brushes past you now. It feels like not needing to correct every lie, answer every slight, decode every silence, or chase every emotional disturbance to its source. It feels like becoming more whole, and that wholeness matters because the less fractured you are inside, the less control the outside world has over you. A divided mind is easy to provoke. A hungry ego is easy to bait. An unhealed insecurity is easy to exploit. A person who still needs to be constantly understood is easy to exhaust. But a person who knows themselves, who has sat with their own wounds, who has stopped making every outside movement mean something permanent about their worth, begins to move differently. They become calmer without becoming weak, more silent without becoming passive, more selective without becoming cold. They stop offering emotional access to everyone who knocks, and that is the real turning point. Because once you understand that your reactions are often revealing your unhealed attachments, your whole relationship with conflict changes. You are no longer just trying to manage people. You are learning to manage entry points. You are learning which parts of yourself still hand out permission too easily. You are learning where your peace leaks. You are learning why some people still have too much reach. And that naturally leads to the next question. Once you see the hook, and once you understand the wound it touches, how do you actually live differently? How do you walk through daily life without being emotionally available to every little thing? How do you protect your mind without becoming isolated? How do you stop reacting not once, but as a way of living? That is where the real discipline begins. So how do you actually live this way? You stop treating every disturbance like an invitation. You stop assuming that because something touched your emotions, it deserves your response. You stop giving every comment a trial, every silence a meaning, every disrespect a ceremony inside your head. You begin to practice a simpler question in real time. Does this deserve a place in my mind? Most of the time, the answer is no. And that is where your freedom begins. Not when people finally act right, not when nobody misunderstands you, not when life becomes calm and fair and emotionally convenient. Your freedom begins when you become more selective than your impulses. When you learn to let things pass without turning them into identity, drama, or personal philosophy. That takes practice. It looks like catching yourself before you send the long message. It looks like refusing to replay the conversation for the 10th time. It looks like noticing the urge to defend yourself and letting silence do the work. It looks like walking away inwardly before you walk away physically. It looks like protecting your attention as if it were part of your future, because it is. And the more you practice that, the more your life starts to change in quiet but serious ways. Your mind gets cleaner, your energy returns, your days feel less crowded. You stop carrying people who were never meant to travel with you internally. You become harder to provoke, harder to distract, harder to control. That is what ignoring people really is at its highest level. It is not pettiness, it is not ego, it is not pretending not to care. It is self-respect in action. It is the refusal to let every outside movement create an inside collapse. It is the discipline of keeping your peace where it belongs. It is the decision to stop leaking life into places that cannot build anything back for you. And maybe that is the truth you needed to hear. You do not need to attend every insult. You do not need to answer every misunderstanding. You do not need to prove your heart to people committed to seeing it wrongly. You do not need to fight for peace in places that profit from your reaction. Some things do not need your words. They need your absence. They need your silence. They need your lack of participation. Because the moment you stop feeding what was draining you, it starts losing power. And that is the shift. You stop living like an open door. You stop living like every passing force has the right to enter you. You stop confusing emotional availability with virtue. You stop surrendering your inner world to people who have not earned a second of it. You become calmer but stronger, quieter but clearer, less reactive but more in control, less available to chaos and more available to your own life. That is the goal. To build a mind that does not belong to the last person who upset you. To build a nervous system that does not obey every outside trigger. To build a life that moves by principle, not by provocation. So the next time someone tries to pull you out of yourself, remember this. Not everything deserves entry. Not everything deserves energy. Not everything deserves you. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing at all. If this episode spoke to you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me here. Because this path is not about escaping life. It is about learning how to walk through it without handing your mind to everything that tries to disturb it. The world will keep making noise. You do not have to let it become your voice.